Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Friday, March 14th, 2025. I am Dave Biddle. I'll be joined by Patrick Murphy in just a moment. J-Book is out of town on a beautiful vacation, so he'll be back with me next Friday. My man Patrick was happy to jump on. I'm very happy to have Patrick. We're going to get into the biggest questions facing Ohio State entering spring. Not necessarily like concerns. Like we're going to talk about Julian Sayin to start off. He's certainly not a concern of mine, but, we do have questions. How's he going to be this year? I have no doubt eventually he's going to be a very, very, very good starting quarterback at Ohio State. Will it be this year? Will it be right away? We'll get into that and much more about the Buckeyes with spring ball kicking off today's Friday, Monday. Spring ball is kicking off this Monday. Practice is going to be open. And we're going to get Coach Day afterwards. So Monday is going to be a huge day with the first day of spring ball and practice being open to the media. Really looking forward to that. Before we bring in Patrick, I'm going to let you guys know once again about our friends over at Cornbread Hemp and a great deal you guys can get. And I know you guys like this product because they keep telling us that you like it because you keep buying it with the code Bucknuts. We like hearing that. It is time to experience your healthy happy hour. Cornbread Hemp provides a natural and healthier way to experience a carefree moment. Cornbread's THC gummies offer a balanced sense of happiness and relaxation. These are America's only USDA-approved organic THC gummies. Real THC, no synthetics, 100% legal hemp, fast and free shipping. If you're looking for a healthier way to enjoy a carefree moment, you have to give Cornbread Hemp a try. They've created the first ever USDA organic THC gummy that's 100% legal. As a special offer for Bucknuts Morning 5 listeners, you can get 30% off your first order. Just visit cornbreadhemp.com/bucknuts. Use promo code Bucknuts at checkout. Again, that's cornbreadhemp.com/bucknuts. And use code Bucknuts for 30% off your first order. Cheers to a healthier happy hour. Speaking of happy hour, let's bring in the host of the nearly world famous Bucknuts Happy Hour, Patrick Murphy. Good to see you, my friend.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing great. Spring ball kicking off on Monday. I like the access we're getting. We're getting there'll be 3 practices that'll be open to us, including Student Appreciation Day. We're getting all the coaches. We're getting Coach Day like 3 or 4 different times. We're getting the coordinators a couple different times, Patricia and Hartline. We're getting all the position coaches. We're getting all the top guys at the positions. We're not going to get everybody at all the players. But what do you think of our media schedule that we finally got yesterday?
Yeah, I like it. I think it's similar to what they've done in past years. I wondered if it might change given the fact that they are kind of condensing things into 4 weeks instead of 5. But, I'd always take more access, right? More chances to watch practice or whatnot. But the fact that we're going to get 3 days, including, like you said, the Student Appreciation Day, which I've actually never been at because there's been a conflict every year I've done this. So I think this year I will be able to actually go out and cover that.
Now that you mentioned it, yeah, I don't remember you being there. I would have never. I forgot about that because this will be like your 7th. This was your 7th season on the beat with us.
I started at Bucknuts in 2016, partway through the 2016 season.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it'd be this was your 8th year.
Yeah.
This will be your 8th time going through Student Appreciation Day as a Bucknuts staff member. This will be your first time going. I never would have guessed that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So for me, I guess that's exciting. But yeah, no, I think it's good. I think we'll be able to see a good amount, hear plenty, and have plenty of coverage for the fine folks out there.
All right. So Julian Sayin, we're going to get into just, biggest questions that we have about this team entering spring. Now, here's the thing. I think, as I said at the top of the show, I think he's going to be really good. I just question when, because let's take CJ Stroud for an example. Entering his 2nd year in the program, starting quarterback. We all remember that Minnesota game. Now, he was dealing with a shoulder injury during camp when they were like, oh yeah, we want to give him some days off just to rest the shoulder, but nothing's wrong with it. It's like, oh, okay. I didn't, fault Ryan Day for not informing Minnesota our quarterback's banged up, but so I'm sure that factored into it to the point where Kyle McCord even started with I believe the next game, right? As
2 games later.
2 games later. That's right. Thank you. So Stroud, we know he ended up being pretty good, right? Didn't look great his first. It didn't look bad. I mean, you go back and look at it. I think maybe he took too much flack from fans, but So I don't know, man. Like, what do you think? What do you expect out of Julian Sand this year, especially early in the season? Because, man, starting against Minnesota on the road was tough. That's not as tough as starting against Texas. At least it's at home, though.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, was at least it's at home. Look, I think the expectations have to be high for Julian Sand. He was a 5-star kid coming out of high school, a kid Ohio State heavily recruited who decided to, initially go to Alabama, out of Southern California, and then ends up with Nick Saban retiring, ends up in Columbus. He was the 3rd ranked quarterback and a top 20 kid overall. So expectations should be high. I think from what we saw last year in fall camp, my expectations are he needs to build on that. And we saw some really good days. Now, there were also some days from Julian Sand where he looked more like a freshman, or some plays, I should say. So, that will be a thing I want to see in spring is kind of the progression of Julian Sand and what's next. And look, I know we all assume that he's going to be the quarterback, just like we did with CJ Stroud. Ryan Day, just like he did with CJ Stroud, whether it's a real quarterback competition or not. And I think this is more real than the CJ Stroud one was. But he's still going to have to win this job, right? So he's got to go out and look good in spring. If they get to the end of spring practice and Lincoln Keenholz is still taking the first snaps for some reason, then maybe we'll have some questions. But no, I think you should be excited if you're a Buckeye fan about Julian Sand. He's got a good arm, really good arm. Could there be some growing pains? Sure. I think the one thing that we've heard, came up a lot from guys the NFL Combine, is that he needs to be more vocal. I think now he's being thrust into that role just naturally with Will Howard leaving. Same with Lincoln Keenholz, frankly. And so that's an area where I think he can still grow. But in terms of the physical traits, I like the fact that he, was able to use those a year in the program, wasn't thrust into this in year one. And I have high expectation. I think everyone should.
Yeah, you look at the 24/7 Sports rankings. Yeah, he was the number 3 quarterback in the country, behind number 1 DJ Lagway at Florida, Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. You look at the 24/7 Sports composite. The composite actually had Sand as the number 1 quarterback in the country. So splitting hairs. Those 3 guys were all ranked high by everybody. And I just Sand being, however you want to look at, number 1 quarterback, number 3 quarterback, whatever. 5-star according to everybody, number 1 player out of the state of California, and handpicked, as you mentioned, by Nick Saban. Nobody benefited more from Nick Saban retiring than Ohio State. I mean, think about it. Like, Caleb Downs wouldn't be here. And without Caleb Downs, you can mention this about a lot of guys, I think, on the team. Without Caleb Downs, I don't think they win a national championship. And again, you can say that about a lot of guys on that team. Nick Saban retiring definitely helped Ohio State. Now Ohio State, I believe, has their starting quarterback thanks to Nick Saban. So it says a lot to me that Julian Sand was handpicked by Nick Saban, and was one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the country. All right. I agree with you. I expect him to be – I think there's going to be some growing pains. I don't expect him to go out there and light up Texas for 300 yards. That doesn't seem like reasonable at all. And I do think they're going to rely on – even though you're losing – it sounds crazy. You're losing like a tremendous tandem at running back, but – Let's get into running back now, because I think with James Peoples and CJ Donaldson, I really like that 1-2 tandem. Now, are they going to be as good as Quinshawn and Trey? No. But I still really, really like that tandem. I think that's going to be a good rushing attack. And you have Sam Williams-Dixon coming back. And you heard what Carlos Lachlan, he gushes about these 3 freshmen, including Turbo hasn't even enrolled yet. But he talked a lot about Bo Jackson, 6 foot, 220 already. He's up to 220. One of those freshmen, I think, is going to have a relatively big role. But your thoughts on the running backs entering spring?
I learned very quickly last year, trust Carlos Lachlan. And you just look at his track record going back to before he was even really a running backs coach, the guys that he's worked with, working his way up to being at Oregon and then being at Ohio State. These guys and Travion Henderson, but he found a perfect balance between those two to get impressive. So I expect more of the same. Different kind of players, CJ Donaldson and James Peoples, who I think we both agree will be the top 2 backs. But Lachlan has done this before with very different backs. So, it hasn't always been the exact same mold of Quinshawn and Trey. So I think, look, that will again be one of the best tandems in the country. Will either of them be, a top running back when you look at the statistics? Probably not, just because I do think that they will, just like Trey and Quinshawn, split the load. But I think obviously you saw the reasons for that at the end of the season when both guys were breaking off big runs in the college football playoff, right? And helping Ohio State win a national championship. So, CJ Donaldson, I think a lot of people look at him and look at what he's done thus far and think, oh, he's a big, powerful back. And he is. But talking to Carlos Laughlin when we were out in Atlanta for the national championship, he was talking about this guy can line up at receiver. We're going to move him around a little bit. We're going to use him in the pass game. James Peoples is a guy who can do some different things as well. Travion Henderson, and I know others have done it as well, have compared James Peoples to J.K. Dobbins, and that guy did pretty well at Ohio State, and pretty well once he got he's been healthy in the NFL. So if that comparison holds up, you're going to have another stud there. And then you have a veteran guy who's played a good amount of football. And CJ Donaldson, if you look at him at West Virginia, he shared the load each year. So this won't be new for him. And he put up pretty good numbers behind, an offensive line and in an offense that wasn't as explosive as what he'll be in at Ohio State. So I like them. I am intrigued by the freshman you mentioned, and Sam Williams-Dixon, the guy who entered the transfer portal, comes back. Okay, what I hope we get to talk to him at some point, because it's like, was it that there were no suitors out there, or was it that Ohio State explained, like, look, you may have a bigger role than you think on this team next year just because you didn't as a freshman, and then how do the freshmen incorporate into that? Can it even be a 3-man rotation if somebody does emerge as opposed to just 2? I think that will be interesting to follow.
I like James Peoples being compared to J.K. Dobbins for many, many reasons. J.K. Dobbins, one of the most underrated Ohio State players, because how many Ohio State running backs have rushed for 2,000 yards in a season? One, J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins is the only one to hit 2,000 rushing yards. And it wasn't like just a year where they pounded the rock. Like, they had Justin Fields, as I recall, that year, and Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. They threw the ball a little bit that year. Yeah. 2019, that 2019 team was loaded. So, yeah, J.K. Dobbins was a hell of a good back, and from Texas. So I like you're comparing a Texas kid to another Texas kid. These Texas kids tend to work out pretty well.
Yeah.
I like we have Devin Sanchez and Pettijohn coming in, a couple more Texas kids already here, not coming in, already here. So offensive line, let's get into that. I feel good about the offensive line. Obviously, when you look at what happened with the national championship run, it definitely was a blessing in disguise going into this year. They were able to win the national championship. And they still got these guys experience that otherwise would not have played if not for injuries. Carson Hinsman, who obviously already had some experience, but Luke Montgomery wouldn't have been seeing the field. Instead, he's out there starting the national championship game. Saraveld was technically a backup for the national championship game, but he had Chabot at right guard, and obviously Saraveld would play left guard and right guard. So those 3 guys man the 2 guard spots. Hinsman at center. You got Padilla on the rise at center. And then you've got some intriguing transfers. I really like Oni Onwa, the kid from Rice, the man child, 6'6", 245 or 345, not 245. That wouldn't be good enough.
Not big.
345. And Phillip Daniels as well. And I think Ian Moore is going to be a redshirt freshman. I think he can compete for that right tackle spot with Daniels. I feel good about the offensive line. How do you feel about it? What do you think is going to happen at center? Do they leave Hinsman there? Just break it down for me.
I think you feel a lot better than you did at this time a year ago. Like, that was the one question we had about an otherwise national championship roster was, would that offensive line be good enough to kind of get the job done? And then by the end of the season, it was an almost completely different offensive line that did get the job done, right? So I think the biggest thing for me is Tyler Bowen. And when we talked to the coaches the other day, was asked about the fact that he hasn't been an offensive line coach in a while. And he's really only coached offensive line, having that title, for 3 seasons of his coaching tenure. So, what is he as an offensive line coach? The complaints about Justin Fry and his recruiting, understandable, but when they needed him to develop guys, he developed guys. And when they needed him to solve some problems on the offensive line, he did that. Okay, Tyler Bowen, you're up next. You come in, you inherit probably a better room than Justin Fry had. But now you've got to, not only be out on the recruiting trail like he's been. If you followed Bill Kurlick, he's been all over all the guys they've offered on the offensive line that are getting in on visits. Okay, now how do you start coaching these guys and things like that? And look, I think he will do a good job. I've talked to people about Tyler Bowen. I think just because he wasn't always named the offensive line coach doesn't mean he didn't work with the offensive line. He played offensive line at Maryland. He looks like an offensive lineman. He's 6'7". He's 35. So on the end of an NFL career, but there are probably some 34, 35-year-old linemen still playing. So it looks like he could still get out there. So that's for me the biggest thing. I think the talent is there. I do think who will come out at tackle. You mentioned that center spot. I would assume you start with Carson Hinsman and you see how Josh Padilla progresses and if it makes sense to move him. But if you have Saraveld, you have Shabola, and you have Luke Montgomery, you don't necessarily need to move Hinsman to guard,
right?
Unless you really think Josh Padilla is the center or one of those other guys is struggling, but you'd hope that they are building on what they did last season, right?
That's exactly right. And I'm sure people are wondering, well, could you kick one of those guys out to right tackle if Daniels doesn't win the job or if Ian Moore doesn't win the job or somebody else? I suppose you could. Kick one of those guys out to right tackle. I mean, Josh Fryer didn't necessarily have the feet for a right tackle, but he started there for 2 years.
Yeah.
Segar doesn't really have the feet to play, in my opinion, tackle. It's why he's playing guard. Probably the same thing with Sarah. And Saravel's just a mauler. I really, really, really like him. Montgomery, I guess one of those guys could play tackle. Hinsman played tackle in high school. Mm-hmm. I guess one of those guys could kick out to right tackle, but I think it'll be Daniels if I had to bet. And I wouldn't rule out Ian Moore. He's a big boy. I got a chance to. I always knew he was big, but I got a chance to talk to him. I'd love to say eye to eye. It's more like me looking up at him in Atlanta, and he's a serious young man. I like that for my offensive lineman. So yeah, they've got a lot of good stuff there. Speaking of good stuff, let you guys know about Gooder sunglasses. And then Patrick and I are gonna get into the defense. How are the Silver Bullets going to look? What are our biggest questions about the Silver Bullets entering spring? But there's no questions about Gooder. If you want stylish sunglasses starting at just $25 a pair, Gooder is the place for you and me. As you guys know, I'm a customer for sure. I have multiple pairs of their Operation Blackout sunglasses. I love those. They've got a bunch of other ones, though, too. They've got a very wide variety and a bunch of cool names to go with them. Make sure you guys get your own. You can get a great deal and help our show out all at the same time. That's right. If you need a new pair of sunglasses, Gooder is giving Bucknuts Morning 5 listeners free shipping. You can go to gooder.com/Bucknuts. Use code Bucknuts for free shipping. Gooder offers 30-day money-back guarantee and 100% satisfaction. Again, that's gooder.com/Bucknuts and use code Bucknuts for free shipping. I might or might not have lost another pair of Operation Blackouts, but that's good. I still have one left, and then I'm going to buy more.
I thought I had my pair sitting here. I was going to put them on, but they are not where I thought they were. So
I don't even have the pair with me. They're my one pair left is in the cup. There's your Operation Blackout, and you got the nice little box here. But I don't actually have the glasses in there, but whatever. I do have the national championship program now. Woohoo! Yeah. Woo! Still basking. Been less than 2 months, still basking. It's funny, spring ball is going to kick off Monday, and it's late, as you mentioned, later than they normally do it by a couple of weeks, 4 weeks instead of 5. And it's still going to be on Monday, less than 2 months since we were sitting there at Mercedes-Benz, and they won the national freaking championship. All right. Defense. Coach Day was I asked him a question about are you going to look for the portal? And he went on a long diatribe about he doesn't like the timing of the portal. I was like, is he actually going to that was interesting. I thought I was going to have to reset and be like, yeah, what about are you guys going to get anybody in the portal? Are you going to look, what positions are you looking at? And he said defensive line's a concern depth wise. I think they like their projected starters, but so let's start there. What are your thoughts on this D line?
Well, I mean, when you lose all 4 starters, I think there certainly will be questions, regardless of what you have behind them. And I think there are guys who you expect to step up. Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry on the edges, Edric Houston, Caden McDonald and on the interior. There's some other guys that can mix in there. But yeah, I think depth is something they need to develop. Logan George is a guy they brought in, a transfer already, but he comes from a lower level. I think, Idaho State?
Yep.
And so, he's going to have to prove that he can play at a Big Ten level, an Ohio State Big Ten level, top of the Big Ten. So there are some certain questions about the depth of that group. Also, what is it going to look like? Will Ohio State stick with, almost exclusively 4 down linemen? Will that change with Matt Patricia coming in? It sounded when we were talking to Larry Johnson like he would be willing to relent a little bit more on that. At least that was the impression I got. So I wonder if maybe we see some more 3 down linemen, which then obviously changes your depth conversation, right? Just because you have fewer guys out on the field. But then that obviously brings up some questions about, linebackers and if you have the right personnel to do that, how much you do it, things like that. I don't know if we will get those answers in spring ball. I imagine at least when we are watching, they will keep things rather vanilla and just kind of work guys in as they can in a 4-man front just to get that ready. But I certainly think keeping an eye on who is getting the reps, that it's an interesting position. Ryan Day talked about there are 3 categories of the guys who have played a lot, the guys who have played a good amount but are stepping into bigger roles, and then the guys who really haven't played much at all. I would assume all of these defensive linemen would fall into that second category, but Kenyatta Jackson played a good amount of snaps last year. Do you need him a ton? He's in his 4th season. Do you need him a ton? And I'm just using him as an example. Do you need him a ton during spring practice? Or is he a guy who maybe, okay, we kind of know what he can do. We'll ramp him up in fall camp, but maybe we give him a little bit of time off and develop some of that depth underneath him? Or do you feel like he needs more reps? He needs to grow. There are still things he needs to work on. I think that'll be interesting too.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's going to be interesting. Guys like Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, yeah, do they fall in that second group? I think they technically probably do the way Coach Day described it. But yeah, you could put them in that first group. Be like, yeah, I mean they were backups, but they're now in their 4th year. They played a lot on the national championship team. Like that's the thing, man. The 4, I mean, Tuimoloau and Sawyer just took it to another level in the playoffs. I mean, it's crazy. Tuimoloau, what do you have, 6.5 sacks in the 4 playoff games? He had 6 during the regular season. He had a solid regular season and then just went off in the playoffs. Same thing with Sawyer. They just went. I thought Tyleek Williams played well. Ty Hamilton played well. And then, so you had a great starting defensive line. Then you had these 4 guys coming off the bench with, Caden McDonald, D tackle, and Edric Houston at D tackle. Hero Canoe was playing. Really 5 guys off the bench, and then Curry and Jackson. Really 6 because Mitchell Melton played too. Yeah. So they were just stacked on that defensive line. They legit had 10 guys.
Kenyatta Jackson played 314 snaps last year, which is more than any other, almost by 100 snaps, more than any other backup defensive lineman. So that's why I think maybe you could group him with that first group. It just depends on where you think he is developmental wise. I think, does he need more work, or, has he gotten enough playing time, enough reps in practice, which we obviously aren't there to see all the time, that you feel good about giving him some time off. There's a few guys I think that kind of will straddle that line a little bit, maybe in some days, out some days kind of thing.
Yeah, Jason on Facebook, moving Hicks makes me think 3-4. Yeah, I mean, I think also that I wouldn't look too much in them moving Hicks, that's going to dictate the scheme. I just think that they feel like that's the best spot for him. And I know a lot of you guys have been saying that since he was a young buck. Not that he's old, but he's entering his 4th year now. He never redshirted. So this, unless I'm missing something, this will be his last year. But I like that CJ Hicks is moving to defensive end. Just see ball, get ball. Though he has to be able to seal the edge, though. There's no doubt. You have to be able to go up against tight ends and defensive ends, tight ends and offensive tackles. Can he do that? All right. Let's get to linebacker. Speaking of CJ Hicks moving. Now, obviously, I mean, we know Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese are going to be starters. It sounds like Peyton Pierce has a lot of helium, as the kids say. Sounds like Peyton Pierce is a guy that they really like. I know James Laurinaitis really likes him. So if they do go with a traditional 4-3, I could see Peyton Pierce being a starter.
Yes, I think he would probably be that next guy. James Laurinaitis actually talked about that when we talked to him last week. You lose Gabe Powers, who probably would have been in that conversation. James Laurinaitis did bring up, I think a couple times when we talked to him, the fact that Sonny Styles actually started last season as the Mike linebacker because of Cody Simon being out.
Yeah.
So I do wonder, Arvell Reese obviously came in and played that last year. I think that is where Arvell Reese, obviously he will be one of the 2 linebackers, but I'm intrigued by the idea that maybe they might work them both at those 2 positions just to have them ready and see who's best between Sonny and Arvell, and then kind of fill in behind those 2. I'm excited for Arvell Reese. We're talking about Julian saying off the top and the excitement. I think Buckeye fans, and they probably were from what they saw early last season, but this is a guy who I think can do some things for the Buckeyes. If we're going to talk CJ Hicks, like I think he reminds me, the potential there reminds me of Baron Browning. And like by the time everyone realized Baron Browning probably should have been rushing off the edge, he was headed to the NFL. And I'm glad that they are at least giving CJ Hicks the opportunity, even if it is only 1 year, to do this and kind of show what he can do. I expect he will still do some linebacker stuff. Like I know Larry Johnson said he's in his room right now kind of learning that, but James Laurinaitis said he wasn't sure if that would be a full-time thing or not. So look, he's been in a linebacker room for 3 years. He knows the linebacker stuff, but it would not surprise me if you see him kind of do a mix of things. But they've certainly got some talent in that linebacker room. And you can use these guys in different ways. Arvell Reese is a very different player than Cody Simon. And these guys don't need to be Cody Simon. They just need to be able to play at that level. And, we've seen it from Sonny Styles, the way he evolved as a player last year from kind of looking like deer caught in the headlights early on to being a really good linebacker. And I think it was smart of him to come back and play his senior year. And I think Arvell will develop as well.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see. Arvell I love talking to him down in Atlanta. I think maybe I'd interviewed him once before, but I can't remember. But just getting to interview him one-on-one, this kid is just, I don't know. I think he's going to be special. It's going to be fun watching him. And yeah, how big is Reese? He's like 6'4", 240. And he runs like the wind. And I love what Patricia said, man. Like when he was like talking about Reese and Styles, he's like, I love big linebackers. When I came in and saw these big 6'4", 240-pound guys, I was like, I'm home. Is what he said. He said, I'm home.
Yeah, he's listed at 6'4", 238 on last year's roster. And one thing I think you should point out, that high school, Glenville, we know how those guys do.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good. And I think Bryce West is a guy to keep in mind. Speaking of which, let's talk about the DBs. Pretty nice when you have Caleb Downs back. I think the best defensive player in college football entering next year. Hopefully he'll win the Thorpe Award. We'll see what happens there. Sometimes they look at stats for awards like that, and sometimes they don't. I always bring up Sean Springs was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year in 1996 with 0 interceptions because people actually looked at the fact that nobody threw his way. That's why he had 0 interceptions. He still was Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. So hopefully they don't just look at stats. Or hopefully Caleb Downs puts up the type of stats that it doesn't even matter. But I like that IGB is back. I think that they can coach. He got a little better about being handsy toward the end of the year, but obviously they need to coach that out of him. But I think IGB can have a big senior year. I'm really glad he's coming back. Jermaine Matthews out there stepping in. He's basically almost played like a starter's snaps in the playoffs. Curious what they're going to do at safety next to Downs. Curious to get your thoughts on that with Jalen McClain and Malik Hartford and whoever else might be in there. Also curious to get your thoughts on the slot, the nickel. Lorenzo Styles is a guy that Matt Guerrieri mentioned when we met with him last week. They could put IGB in there if they wanted to. They could put Aaron Scott, Bryce West, maybe a Devin Sanchez. I think they're going to leave Devin on the outside. What are they going to do at slot? What are they going to do at the other safety spot? Just your thoughts overall in the secondary.
I think Lorenzo Styles is probably the guy who starts in the slot, at least going into spring, just because he's played there last season when they went to those dime packages and whatnot. But I don't think he just gets the job. I mean, you have too much depth in this room to just say anybody is. I mean, look, Igbinosun, I think still has to, he's a starter. Don't get me wrong. But, we saw as Jermaine Matthews came on last year, and yes, it happened after the Oregon game with Denzel Burke's struggles. But Denzel Burke, I thought, responded, and Jermaine Matthews continued to get playing time. And, it became as you mentioned, a full rotation by the playoff between all three of them. So I don't think anybody should feel secure with their job. And I think that's a good thing at the cornerback spots, because I think it means everybody has to bring their A game every day. And that's the way I assume Tim Walton will handle it, but knowing Tim Walton a little bit. At safety, look, I think when you start with Caleb Downs, you're in a really good spot, right? Yes, it matters who's playing next to him. And Lathan Ransom was an underrated part of this defense, not by Buckeye fans, but I think nationally, some of the stuff he was able to do last year was just so impressive. But he was overshadowed by Caleb Downs, and I think that will be the case for whoever slots in next to him. I do think the two you mentioned, Jalen McClain, Malik Hartford, are the most likely candidates. But I think the fact that they get to work alongside Caleb Downs, the fact they've spent a year kind of seeing how he does things, learning from Lathan Ransom as well, I think both of those guys will be prepared. It wouldn't surprise me if you go into fall camp, maybe even the season, we've seen it before, both guys are going to play type of thing with those guys. I think they're both talented. We've heard positive things. Malik Hartford started a game already in his Ohio State career, right? And then Jalen McClain kind of came on last offseason. So I think you're in a good spot with both of those guys. They both need big springs. Caleb Downs is obviously a guy who will be in that first category of has played a lot, probably won't do much in the spring. So I think they will both have a lot of opportunities. As much depth as you have at cornerback, you don't have as much at safety, at least not proven. So, you want to make sure you develop some of that in spring. But I do think those are two guys who will battle and are going to be pretty good alongside Caleb Downs.
Come on, you got to get up earlier in the morning to fool me with Ohio State trivia, asking, do I know who the assassin is? Come on. Of course I know who the assassin is. Jack Tatum. Jim Tressel, until I got too politically incorrect when he came in, they had the Jack Tatum hit of the week. You guys remember that? That wasn't that long ago. I had the Jack Tatum hit of the week. And then, people got all stuff. Yeah, and I'm not going to joke about concussions. Like, that actually is a very serious thing. But when that became like national news, that's when they got rid of the Jack Tatum hit of the week. I loved hearing when Tressel would come in. Our Jack Tatum hit of the week was like, I love that. Oh well. But yeah, you better get up earlier in the morning to fool me on Ohio State trivia. All right, let's get Patrick's thoughts on this. We'll get him out of here. Finish the show on this question from Brian on YouTube. What coach is replacing Hartline? They're not bringing in another wide receiver coach. He's going to call the plays and coach the wide receivers. Am I missing something?
No. I mean, last year, Chip Kelly was calling the plays and coaching the quarterbacks. Now, behind the scenes, he had this guy named Billy Fessler, who turned out to be a pretty good quarterbacks coach, is now the full-time quarterbacks coach. Just wrote about him yesterday, if you want to read about Billy. Brian Hartline will have help. I don't know off the top of my head who is like the assistant wide receivers coach. But look, you've got Keenan Bailey, who's worked with wide receivers before, now is co-offensive coordinator. So I imagine he will work with wide receivers as well. But you aren't bringing in another guy, as you said, Dave. Brian Hartline will preside over the offense, but will also work with these wide receivers. I imagine, especially this season, you will see Ryan Day a bit more on the offensive side of the ball, at least early on as things get going. But yeah, you don't need Devin Jordan. There you go. You don't need, I think, another guy to replace that. I think it's pretty typical in college football, at least, that the offensive coordinator has a position that he also works with. Not always. I know some programs do it differently, but no, I don't think you need a person you're hiring to replace Brian Hartline, because I think Brian Hartline, especially having 2 years of experience of sort of doing this, will be able to balance both things. You hope, at least, right?
That's right. And if things do go the wrong way, I'm sure Ryan Day will just step in, and he doesn't want to do that, though. Being the CEO worked. They won a national championship,
right? So
I know he wants to stay in that role. So I think Hartline's going to do a good job, but we shall see. Good thing about sports, we're going to find out for sure in a few short months. Great stuff, man. I appreciate you jumping on.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Dave.
He is Patrick Murphy. Thanks to Patrick. Thanks to all of you. We appreciate it very much. Hope everyone has a great day and a great weekend. Go Bucks.